So somebody, what would be third party? Because the reason I'm asking this question is when this topic was given and I happened to talk to a couple of people, there were two divergent views which I got. So one was a very inclusive definition, one was a very specific definition. So I just wanted to hear from you what you think is a third party.
It's like vendors and connected measures.
Okay.
Stakeholders.
Yeah, okay. So that is a very inclusive or a very open definition. But a lot more people, when we talk about third party, immediately they jump to outsourcing service providers. So I hope to cover both these aspects today. Okay, primarily. So, and another aspect is we always think about when we talk about third party, we think only on the cost side, okay, on the supply side, and never on the sales side. But sales side also there is quite a lot of outsourcing which is happening, or rather I would say dependence on third parties. But the principles on how we manage the risks and the management is more or less the same. So we are ourselves, that is the company would be its own party. So and the second party should be the customer, and the third party is the other people who are engaged with the company. So typically in a grammar we read no first person, second person, third person, same logic. Some problem I think. Yeah. So I'm just trying to, whatever I said, I've just captured here. So we have a sell side and a buy side. Buy side, we all know, we have vendor, then contract manufacturing is outsourced third party manufacturers. In a number of cases, you have where they do some portion painting and then some mining, some machining work and all that. So third party manufacturers. And then you have outsourced service vendors, which is now an increasing a very big universe right now, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, it's grown big. So there, we heard from the finance function, you see, you have accounting, payroll, and IT is one major one. Apart from that, I think we should also incorporate logistics, warehousing, quality testing. I mean, this is not an inclusive side, just some indications of who are there. But on the sales side, also the third party risks, we still face the same kind of risks. So they are again, online retailers, your Amazons and eBay and whatever, and then your agents and dealerships come there. And again, the service providers, again, logistics providers, CRM, warehousing, quality assurance. So, and I have not included the whole gamut of your application service providers, SaaS providers, through which you do your billing model, your revenue model, delivery models. So I've not included that here. So that whole concept also comes in third party. So, so just to put things in perspective, who are the third parties? Basically, they are guys who are actually any external service vendor supporter and all that. So basic benefit is to a large extent, the idea is to, one is focus on my core competency, which is probably my main business. So I don't want to spend time on support functions. That could be one reason. Two is capacity constraints, especially when you're outsourcing manufacturing functions. And then three could be technical challenges where I don't have the specialist for the work specifically. So that could be a third. A typical example would be maybe tool development, right? And then certain machining process which requires high skill, high precision. I may not have the facility or the skill labor for that. And then in terms of servicing, again, IT is a very, very good example where you have very technical people involved and you may not want to invest because you want to invest on the core. And then there is this concept which is coming up frequently called fourth party. Fourth party is nothing but subcontractor of a subcontractor. So when a subcontractor gives out subcontracting functions, so the risks, why we have brought this is because your risks will travel through the entire supply chain or your value chain, whatever we call it. So on the sales side or the supply side. So that's why this is important to understand if there is a fourth contractor or a fifth contractor. Usually, one of the controls, I mean, I'm jumping things here, but usually one of the things, especially if it's a very critical function that we are trying to outsource, one of the risk mitigation factors is it's clearly mentioned by the businesses that please don't outsource to subcontracting is not allowed. is one condition which is normally put in contract so that the risk is mitigated at least to that extent. You already are running a huge risk in giving third party contracts. So again, and without your knowledge, if it's given to the next party, then how do you control their processes? How do you control quality there? How do you control various adherences? So that becomes a huge challenge. So the concept of the fourth party, whatever, so that is there right now. And another thing is the whole approach, if you see to third party risk management, should be something called an extended enterprise. This is a very nice term which I came across. What do you mean by extended enterprise? See, third party risk management should not be treated as a silo, as an independent function or a risk. So third parties are nothing but my extended arm virtually. I've outsourced it to some person for various reasons. So whatever are my policies, procedures, and then my controls, my culture, control environment, my culture, whatever it is, my values, they should also apply to the third parties. So that's how it is the best way to manage the risks of the third party vendors. So that's why we must. So unfortunately, currently in India, that kind of a holistic concept is not yet developed with regard to third party vendors, whether it be the suppliers also. There is a very fragmented way things are getting handled. There is a lot of management which is happening in silos. See, for example, a typical supplier function, if you take, I mean, let us take a case of a manufacturing concern, let's say, and let's say they are producing an auto part. Okay, and maybe there are certain components, small minor components, for which they want some extra machining to happen. Whatever, for economic reasons or technical reasons, they have not invested in house, so they are outsourcing it. Right now, in this case, the how do I control? I mean, the whatever controls, policies, etc. I apply should apply to him also. And how do I manage that? That is what we are going to see here. So in this case, um, I want to say something as it were. Okay, no problem. So this is the concept of an extended enterprise. Right now, it's not happening. No, what I'm trying to say is in India, right now, most of the companies, if you see, the who is responsible for this third party's performance. See, because there are aspects like a quality, and then there is timely delivery, because that's as per the contract. And basic thing is timely delivery, and the delivering the quantity which you have contracted. So two important conditions of your contract when you're doing an outsourcing. And then, of course, there are other terms like payment terms. So if you have given advance, you have to give it, the delivery should be within X number of days from the date you have received the advance. And then payment terms. So we have to adhere to the payment terms, stuff like that. And then again, terms, Incoterms. That is, how do you the freight, whose responsibility it is, who arranges to pick up and drop. Normally, the vendor of these, the main organization will take the responsibility as far as subcontracting is concerned. In fact, when we talk about costs, that's one aspect we'll have to consider, because most of the times what happens when we talk about third party cost versus benefit, this logistic part and the additional costs that are incurred, in delivering the product and getting it back, a lot of concerns forget to incorporate that cost in arriving at the total cost of the third party engagement. So that's a very important cost that we need to consider. That's mostly left out in most of the MIS computations, if you go and see, and especially when they're trying to figure out whether to insource or outsource. That kind of this happens. This is just a warning, because we've seen it happening, especially in smaller organizations. That consciousness is not there. So that's one thing you have to always factor in your costing. And so here, what I was trying to say, who's responsible for all this? So there is a quality of the product. Typically, the quality department will move in. And then there are all these supply constraints, supply aspects. Typically, the SEM, your purchase department or your SEM department moves in. And then there is a finance department which tries to see, aspects like whether advance is given, and then when is a bill received, and they have adjusted against the advance. So at least at the base minimum, 3 departments. Right. But if you see the functioning of the 3 departments, it happens in silos. So ultimately, who is responsible for the entire third party? What goes wrong there? So that responsibility per se is not assigned to one department or individual, though largely SEM sort of seems to assume the responsibility. And then again, there is a production department, which actually says whether I have received the quantity in time or not. But I mean, that is only a secondary responsibility for them. So there are at least 3 departments, and most of these departments work in silos. So that's why when we talk about extended enterprise, we have to look at third-party management itself as an overall one single function. So ideally, it should be assigned to one particular person or a particular department higher up, and the entire thing should flow through from that. Only then you get a holistic management. Right now, if you see again the challenges you face, especially when we as auditors go for third party management, is because of this fragmented responsibility, there is also primarily capturing of, so there is a basic lack of responsibility for the overall management, one, and then two is fragmented data. So even when I to do any kind of an analysis, trying to find out what is good, what is bad, whether this guy is good or bad, the data is so fragmented that it is actually a challenge to collate all the data and come to a proper decision. As auditors, and the same thing obviously applies to the management. So those are the challenges we are currently facing in India. Most of the organizations, it's very bad in MSMEs and smaller organizations. So this is again just conceptually what are the various third-party risks. Now we have largely classified into 3 categories. Digital risk, reliability risks, and humanitarian. Reliability, I would largely mean operational risks and humanitarian risks. So if you see the trend right now, especially considering that even hardcore physical manufacturing activities, a lot of them are still being digitized or computerized or whatever. So digital risks, if you see, and this is a survey, I've taken this report from a survey conducted by Deloitte in 2023. So if you see, the cyber risks are the ones which are placed up, right on top. And this is the increasing trend. If you read the report also, it says that perception of the management across industries is that this is considered as the highest risk in the coming years also. Yeah, that's so there we talk about data privacy, geopolitical risk. So data privacy, one small thing. I mean, we of course have a lot of cloud computing, and we have now, right now generative AI and all that. So largely cloud computing has now become a norm, right? So data privacy is again becoming a very, very big risk, and of course your cyber and information security, specifically those two. And in terms of soft services, like for example, your payroll, accounting, and those kind of services, sensitive information, like especially, we are expecting a lot of guidelines on the personal digital DPDP, that is digital private data and all that. So there, the onus is now going to be higher on maintaining data privacy on the, from the vendors end also. So that's something which is actually going to drive in the next 1 or 2 years. It's going to be a huge risk, and how we mitigate that risk is going to be huge, not merely because of loss of data or compromise of data, but because of from compliance angle also, we may have a huge penalty coming up if those things are not taken care of. So there's a cybersecurity risk, and if you look at the operational risks, I want to basically look at 3 points there. One is there is something called concentration risk. So again, if you see some of the companies, they prefer to go in for a single vendor system. Why? Because the cost of developing a vendor is itself very huge in certain industries. How do I develop vendor? Because I need a specification. So, and this, let's say it's precision engineering, for example. So there are specifications in terms of quality, the product, how it needs to be delivered, how it needs to be machined, how it needs to be painted. And then I have quality constraints also, which says that, my rejection percentages should be what, 5%, 1%, or mostly it's around 1 or 2%. So sometimes even less. So in those cases, the enterprises tend to focus on only one or maximum two vendors, because training them, getting ensuring that they put in place systems, both the overall and the organization structure, as well as your technical systems and people and practices in place, it takes at least a minimum period of 2 to 3 years. Right. So developing the vendor, so you have invested the time in trying to ensure that they have reached that level, especially if it's a new vendor. Okay, so that kind of an investment, when it happens in terms of time and effort, and there's also a cost involved to it. So the concentration risk is that we try to restrict it to one or two vendors only, rather than broad basing it. In fact, see, actually, this is a corollary. Okay, so this is a catch-22 kind of a thing, because One of the risk mitigating factors itself is that I broad base my vendors so that the dependency on a single or a very few vendors is limited so that my supply disruptions cannot happen or they are minimized. So the logic is I have to broad base my vendors. But again, because of the cost which is involved in developing all these vendors, in fact, recently my one of our clients told us it's an NNC. So they have received instructions in terms of vendor development that one of their KPIs is to reduce the vendor numbers, quantum of the vendors in each category by at least 30%. So because they want to again bring down the number of vendors so they become more manageable, it's easily accountability increases for each vendor and they're able to ensure basic quality in each of the products that come in so that their management of the vendor reduces over a period of time. In fact, the very funny thing in that, I wouldn't say funny, one of the things in that, if you see, there were at least about 20 categories of products where they had exclusive vendors. There is only a single vendor. Okay, so this is in spite, and again, about 40% were still China vendors. So in spite of this, China plus one model and all going around, so this was a strategy that they have consciously adopted because of these costs which are involved. So you have this concentration risk, and there are enterprises also which take this call to, specifically reduce the cost of management risk of the third-party vendors. Okay, and also probably give increased this thing. And then the other one is regulatory risk. One small example, it's a little old. So Nike, I understand, especially in the 1990s, it faced a lot of backlash because of poor labor practices it followed, especially in its Indonesia and Vietnam factories, where child labor was used, abuse, physical and otherwise, of the laborers was done. So the brand image took a huge hit, and for 2 years the sales fell nearly 40%. So subsequently, they had to take a lot of, processes were built in, lots of checks and balances were built in, regular audits were conducted in all these factories to ensure that the labor practices were on par. So here the reputation risk played a huge regulatory and the reputation risk also, if you see here, 20%. So again, but again in India, we don't see much of that happening. It's largely in the global context and some retail brands, fashion brands, they have these concepts. But if you see ESG, when it is gaining a lot of traction nowadays, so in the next 5 years, probably this could also be one of the factors, the environmental risks and then your regulatory risks and these practices, reputation risk could be on the rise, especially for premier brands and brands which are positioning themselves globally or which are, which have a specific brand value enhanced or in the public mind, they have a specific image built in. So this we can see like what probably from 20%, my expectation is it can go up to 30%. This reputation risk and your regulatory risk can actually go up. And definitely, the kind of scenario that we are in, with a lot of change in the regulatory scenario, ensuring compliance itself, across various, especially you have labor laws, you have environmental laws, and then you have so many other laws which have to be complied with on the vendor side. So that is also going to be very huge. So this risk is also going to increase definitely over the next 3 to 5 years. Another aspect was third party risk. This is where I talked about subcontracting. That is what the third party risk is talking. If you see, that is 18. This was in the survey conducted. This is the, you would say, the proportion of the risk perception that the respondents gave. They felt that 62% is the cyber information risk that they have. So they've just pulled the numbers together. These are just some of the examples of third-party usage we have in India across industries. Again, not an exhaustive list. So here again, the major challenge, if you see in terms of regulation, regulatory requirements, see, I've not brought in certain other aspects like telecom and all that, but see, hospitals is a very highly regulated area. And then you have banks and financial institutions, very highly regulated. In fact, RBI has issued a lot of guidelines on third-party sourcing, what can be sourced, how it is to be sourced, what are the controls you need to have, and they have started right from contracts, what needs to be built into the contracts and all that. So they start from contract management itself, right? So that's a highly regulated area that you come across. Textiles, though not highly regulated, it's a question of reputational, especially because most of the textiles, especially like Tirupur area and all that, if you see, export happens. So it becomes a reputational and obviously impacts on the revenue. So that textile and quality there matters a lot. What happens in these cases is some of the textile units, the entire textile itself, the garment itself is produced by somebody. These guys just tag it with their label and then it is sold. So they have some quality checks and all that. So like an auto, it works. The best example of third party excellent management is the auto industry. So if you see their entire supply chain, various parts and all that is regulated by the car manufacturer or the auto manufacturer. And the way they enforce a lot of systems and processes, it's actually very nice. So a very good example, and that is also getting replicated across various other industries. Um, so this is again a theoretical view of what would be advantages, risk and reward. We've talked about risks. So you have certain rewards like cost reduction, increased efficiency, focus on core competencies, access to newer technologies, increase in faster scalability. So increased in faster scalability is largely for your IT units and all that, and where you now increasingly go into cloud and sometimes even in your operations. So this will really matter. And focusing on core competencies we've dealt earlier. So what are the aspects which will drive the risk management function? We start with contract management. Ideally, it should start with vendor selection. We have not brought that here. So vendor selection, so you should have policies, procedures on vendor selection. So that's the first stage. And once I select the vendor, it should be contract management. So like I told you, contract management this is again a huge lacuna in Indian context. Because even in case of outsourced manufacturing, we have seen clients where they just issue a purchase order, not a very comprehensive one. It just states the number of quantities and probably some expected delivery date and a value. So various other conditions which are required, are not mentioned there. Where is the risk here? Like a typical example will again be machining parts. Okay, so where I have outsourced, suppose I'm using steel, let's say stainless steel, high quality stainless steel, and a lot of my processes have to be outsourced for machining. Various types of machinings happen. So here the challenge in steel is the variation because of the weight. Okay, so I would have sent out an X amount of quantity as weight. I would have weighed it and sent out an X amount of this thing. It's not numbers now, it's largely weight driven. So, and then when it comes back, there is a loss which has happened because of the processes which has happened. There is a cutting there, some drilling there, some this thing grinding there which has happened. It will result in loss of the material, right? So most of the contracts actually don't cover one. What about the production parts? That is the once it produced. Suppose I've used a drilling machine there, so some part of the product actually comes out, right? So what do I do when these unused parts or the scrap parts are they to be returned? If they are to be returned, what is the time duration? And then, so these two things especially are not getting addressed in most of the contracts. Now, this can actually result, this is a huge area of fraud, I mean, potential fraud, and there is a possibility of cash loss here because your material gets lost there. Okay, and stainless steel scrap, you all know, depending upon the quality of the steel, the cost, I mean, the recovery rates are pretty high in the stainless steel industry. So this is one thing. Another aspect which there's a lack of control, if you see, is I send like the same thing. I send X quantity in terms of weight, let's say 10 tons I send. For example, when I get back, we know because of the process of manufacturing in my BOM, that is my bill of materials itself, I'm expecting only 8 tons to be, or let's say 9.7 tons to be returned, let's say. So zero point 0.3 tons is expected as scrap or whatever, the left out parts. Now there can be a variation because I told you, like again, stainless steel is subject to a lot of weight variations, right? So there should be again an upper tolerance limit in terms of what can the variation. You can allow variance because it's the nature of the industry, but tolerance limits needs to be defined based upon your experiences. But most of the time, this doesn't happen. And scrap management and this return of this waste parts management is a huge area of laws in most of these industries where you use this and outsource for. So scrap, if you anyway you go to all of these industries, and as an auditor, scrap is a huge area. There are huge lacunas there. And anytime you ask why have you not defined these tolerances, they say it is not possible, madam, because of the nature of the industry. Okay, so it's basically a lack of intention. It is possible. Even a 10%, 15%, 20%, 5%, it's possible. And you can always have exceptional things happen, but otherwise, how do you know whether these guys are actually returned the material to you or not? And responsibility in terms of, I mean, in certain cases, they actually give the responsibility to the third party vendor itself to dispose of the material. So again, a very loose area because then your people should go there. How is the scrap? I mean, operationally, if you see, there are huge points like, how is the scrap maintained or the materials maintained? Let's say good material comes in. I'm not an exclusive vendor. Let's say I'm a machining person. Okay, I'm designing huge stainless steel sheets. I need to cut it to certain dimensions, and I just need to give you the cut material back. Right. So imagine a square. See, most of my sheets can be square cut, and then in round you can imagine all these parts growing up. Right. So this part has to be returned to you. And again, I'm not an exclusive supplier. Okay, so I do this part for about 3, 4 customers. So again, the challenge is inventory management. When the product comes from the customer, now I have to have a designated area where I can identify that this is A customers, B customers, C customers. Never happens virtually, especially in the smaller segment places. And companies also don't enforce these controls very rigorously. So that is one huge area of money loss, literally, which happens for all these industries. So a big area of loss, a big area of control lapse. So if you actually come to see here, performance management is the second area of function, how you control or manage risk for third party. So performance management, like I told you, indicators are like, let's take the same example. What is the material I'm expecting back? What is a good material expected back, scrap material expected back, and what is the tolerance which can be defined there? And how are the materials handled? How it is stored there? Who sells it? So all these things will come there. So they should have controls for physical management of the material there. So all these, and then again, whether timely delivery happens or not. See, if you see most of them, they'll again come back saying, we do vendor evaluation once a year. So I will incorporate all these aspects as part of my vendor evaluation for the third party vendor also. So most of the clients come back on this. But if you actually see the vendor evaluation policy, sometimes are very haphazardly defined. So, I mean, we've seen cases where the third party vendors have not actually been evaluated, or they are, there is the frequency of evaluation or the criteria in which they are evaluated is not consistent across the vendors. And there is no, like I told you earlier, lot of disparate data. So it's very difficult to compile the data and see one-to-one what is happening. And a lot of this is again locally available, not a central data repository for all these things is not even there. So there's a whole, the data itself is very disorganized, disaggregated. So even for the management to have a proper, if you see there's a third part called in performance management itself, one of the aspect is MIS. So I must have some kind of an MIS on the performance of the third party. How do I know he's performing efficiently? And what are the quality rejects which are happening? Is there a proper system in place? Is it consistently followed or not? How does it translate into cost savings or cost loss? I mean, cash losses. So these kind of metrics are something which we can use for reporting regularly. But unfortunately, those kind of metrics are not getting captured or getting captured inconsistently or haphazardly. So that was one thing. And then business continuity and resilience, we've talked about this earlier. Dependency on single party versus multiple. So that is business continuity and resilience. And the relationship management, this is interesting part. Like I told you, most of the time it is a supply chain department which takes the responsibility on the supply side. But on the sales side, if you see, mostly it is handled by the salespeople. Independent audit or independent evaluation of the performance of these third-party vendors Yes, it is happening in some companies, but again, some companies don't necessarily insist on it. So internal audit as a function, I mean, we can drive on all these scope areas specifically, even on the sales side, because aspects like, authorized dealers, a lot of leeway you have, a lot of collaboration which can happen between the authorized dealers and the sales guys, and manipulation in terms of price and materials and all those things can happen. So this is where performance management metrics should be clearly defined, MI should be clearly defined. So all these factors will have an impact to ensure that the relationship is also not misused in any way. Okay. And another important part of relationship in vendors is trust. Okay. So like I gave the example of auto. So see, initially when I start there is a life cycle. We'll come across to that later. Maybe we'll take that later. So, and then financial management we've talked about, and we've talked about data management also. Data management, especially in exit scenarios, is very, very crucial. Especially when you're doing outsourcing of the soft services. So we'll come. That's a separate area that we need to look at. So we talked about functions. So we talked about components here. So again, like any typical process, everything should start at the top. So you have governance, policies, business processes, tools and technologies, risk metrics, and reporting. We covered this earlier. People and organization, I'm talking about who's responsible. Whether we have a single organization responsible for third party monitoring and all that. Tools and technologies is again a very much of tools is currently being used in India. Lots of risk management tools itself can be used here, adapt, but again, right now the adoption is a little less in India. So this is one area which is definitely bound to grow in the coming years. And this is just a kind of a maturity model. We talked about most of the problems I told you is when the organization is in the initial stage. So as and when they mature, they also mature in terms of how they manage and control the third party. So this will become from an initial to defined management, integrated and optimized. If you actually see the main differentiating factors happens in adoption of tools and technologies, risk metrics and reporting. So these are the two areas which will actually drive a lot of things there. Okay, even if I have policies and procedures and all that, these two will make a lot of difference in the maturity and how the organizations handle their third-party risks. This is just a life cycle I sort of, so you know this. I initially plan what I want and then I source it, then they make it and deliver. Then we check the delivery parameters and all that. So whether they're performing, we talked about that. And then the support, whether I need to give them any kind of a support, financial, probably in terms of advances or technical know-how transfer, training of people, those things come up, and then payment. So payment again, largely driven by SLAs. Like I told you, because initially most of the contracts right now, POs are there, but POs don't again define SLAs. See, there are very few matured services which are getting provided right now. So if you again look at traditional, non-traditional, you can say. So technology and technical aspects, and then of course outsourcing in terms of your finance functions has really matured to a large extent now. Though not really where it should be, but yes, there's a lot of maturity. So there are a lot of protective clauses which are brought in into your contract itself in these cases. But like I told you again, the traditional part like manufacturing and all that, still there's a long way to go in terms of SLA enforcement and payment linked to SLAs. So here we are trying to bring what are the management's responsibility and the auditor's responsibility. So just a view from the management side and the auditor side. So again, like I told you, onboarding, ongoing, and offboarding. I would like to focus on the offboarding part particularly. So here are aspects like, again, typically data security, IP protection are major things. Even in the manufacturing sector, suppose let's say there is a tool development, or I've given a specific part for machining and have given the design along with it. So once I discontinue with the vendor, the designs have to come back to me. And how do I ensure that the designs are again, the IP right violation has not happened, the designs have not gone unauthorized manner and shared with the others. So those aspects and those controls are very important there. So we keep, when we talk about IP, we normally keep restricting ourselves in our thought process to software alone. Whereas IP is a major factor also in your manufacturing sector, especially with respect to designs. Okay. So that's something we keep. So if you see, as part of audit, the regular internal audit, conducting exit audits is also a very important part. So you should typically have something like a checklist for exit. So if I'm going to offboard this vendor, then what are the aspects that I need to consider? So again, we'll split it into three parts. Okay, one is of course financial, and then one is of course everything relating to the material and IP rights, material, and all those things. And then the third part is, of course, operational aspects, whether we have cleaned up everything and somebody should sign up and those aspects. So that comes here. And then the contractual obligations, whether they've been completed in all aspects, is something which is very important here. Whether some number of times, we've seen, especially with when there's a relationship with the MSME sector, small scale sector, um, penalties are not imposed for lackluster performance or non-performance, even at the time of exit. And operationally, because I told you, it's all very operating in silos. There is a tendency to miss out on that aspect in the contract management. So these are the real risks that we face there. So I'm skipping the onboarding part. This is usual vendor onboarding controls that we have. Okay, that we need to take care of, except that an extra effort has to be made. So again, whether you've taken multiple codes, all those things, the normal controls that we do for a normal new vendor, only things that we need to consider is, like, for example, certain industries require certifications and the specific technical know-hows, like, especially in the pharma sector, you need to be registered under so and so authority, or you need to have certificates which have a validity period, and whether the certificates have been renewed regularly or not. So this is a very important aspect in onboarding, and so these aspects need to be considered. Mm. Um, See, one aspect of when we say identifying emerging issues at the ongoing stage. See, this is again very largely linked to how I'm monitoring it. So, what are the metrics, performance metrics, vendor evaluation part, and your risk MIS, how robust is the MIS there. So there you can identify early stages. Another aspect is when we were talking to one SEM guy recently, we asked him, why is it that you don't evaluate at least your major vendors? No, there were at least three single source vendors for the company. So we asked them, why is it that you don't do a financial feasibility or financial estimate of the vendor? Why are you not getting financial statements on an annual basis and seeing how robust he is? He said, why should I? He's been a regular vendor. He's been supplying us for my satisfaction. So why should I bother about the financial stability of the vendor? Very important, because you never know, because of financial mismanagement or any other reason, they can just go down and you're an exclusive vendor. So your supply chain is disrupted there. So that's one thing that most of the SEM people are not aware of, or don't realize the risk which is involved in not evaluating the financial strength of the vendor, either at the time of, at least at the onboarding. If the company has a process of at least collecting the financial statements, they at least collect and say, tick the box saying financial statements collected. But at the time of vendor evaluation or monitoring, this process doesn't happen. So that's something which we need to incorporate. So we've just given different examples for review of performance and emerging issues and all that. Okay, specifically with regard to secure data and IP protection. Um, let's take the example of, let's say, payroll data. Okay, I mean, we have come across cases where, for cost efficiency, it's given to a very small chartered accountant firm itself. A lot of chartered accountant firms do this payroll services and outsourced accounting services. So their general attitude is, chartered accountant firm will take care of, right? But again, whether there are enough controls with regard to privacy, whether there are access controls, whether this data is again segregated when they are doing multiple this thing, make a checker whether there is there. those kind of things are not ensured at all at any time. Another thing about contract is it's very important that you have, especially in certain key sensitive aspects, auditability clause is very important. So either they do an audit and give us some comfort, so that's called third party assurance, or the company should be able to go and do an audit regularly once in a while and see where the controls are in operation. Right? So that is something which is lacking right now in most of the vendor management that we have. Um, and then again, the controls with regard to access, encryption, forget about encryption itself, access controls itself is very, very weak in most of the cases. Segregation of data, data storage mechanisms, and then maker-checker concepts are not there. Another aspect is especially with relation to financial data, like payroll or accounting outsourcing or tax, for example. The attitude generally in management seems to be that I have outsourced, they have done the working, so obviously it has to be right. What more do I have to do? So there is no review from the part of the management here. So the question is, what is it that you need to review? So at least some basic thing like, I mean, sometimes the review happens, but it is not evidence. So as an auditor, you're not really sure. Documentary evidence may not be there, but at least when we talk to the management, we can come to some conclusions. Yes, some review has happened. What is the kind of review we are expecting? Like, for example, payroll data, right? Uh, we have seen payroll outsourcing happening without some basic reconciliations done by the payroll service provider. Headcount reconciliation. Very, very important, but that doesn't happen at all. So either the service provider should do or the company should do. This is one way you ensure that the variation in payroll is on account of, it's always to quantity and price, right? So in payroll also it can be headcount and the changes in the pay grade, the pay value, right? So this never happens. Headcount reconciliation doesn't happen. And then gross pay reconciliation, that is last month versus current month, and the reasons. Sometimes what happens is the variance is calculated, but the reasons for the variance are not captured. So mere number, x minus y doesn't give you any insight. We need to find out why. So why is there a variation? So most of the service providers do not seem to be giving that, especially if they are smaller service providers. Neither is the management insisting on that. So there is a higher risk in payroll miscalculations happening. The attitude seems to be, now payroll tapa putana, obviously the employees go to come back. So that is not an internal control. Right. So, so that is something that we'll have to see. And then, I mean, again, with regard to payroll itself, like gross versus net. So typically there is a ratio in every company. The way the pay is structured is you can always arrive at a, it could be 85%, 80%, 75%. That's an approximate number. So you know that there is nothing which has gone wrong in the gross, nothing which has gone wrong in the net. So that kind of a this thing we can have. Again, and with regard to PF and ESI also, small controls that we can. So these are things you can actually, when you give a payroll, for example, as outsourcing, we can actually include these as some of the deliverables when the party gives you back the payroll sheet given to you and insist that these things should happen. And somebody responsible in the management, either from finance or payroll, HR, can actually go through this and come back. And again, of course, data privacy, because you're sharing data. A lot of times it's open mail, no kind of encryption. Even basic password protection doesn't happen when data of the employees are shared for either new joinees or revision in pay or deletion of the employees, exit of the employees. So those are things that we need to take care of, even in the basic payroll function. So tax also we find very. I mean, there have been cases of some of our clients where they have outsourced GST particularly, and they have been block credits taken, and at the time of GST audit, either at the time of 9C filing or subsequently when the department has come for audit, they have found cases of wrong ITC taken. And so there are certain controls which can always be built in, and you can ask the third party service provider to actually give it as part of the deliverables. And these are points which we can always check somebody from there. So this is one thing I wanted to say. And one other aspect is insurance when you have material. So material with the third party also, whether it is covered or insured, whether he has taken insurance or you have taken insurance, we need to cover those risks also. Backup of data with the third party. and then from us. So again, the attitude seems to be, I've outsourced the thing, so you don't take a backup at all. Again, going back to my first slide where we say we have only outsourced the service, not the responsibility. So the management thinking has to change there, right? So this is one thing we always face. So backup of data is the primary responsibility of the management. Service provider can provide it as an additional aspect, but you have to ensure that it is done. Okay. See, again, with respect to cloud, there are two things. There has been a government notification from under the Companies Act that irrespective of where your systems, they don't talk just about cloud, where your application, primary accounting application, financial application, irrespective of where it is hosted, there should be a backup in India. Now, this notification came out in 21, I think. Yeah. But yes, ROC has not been rigorously enforcing it. But this is a challenge, especially in case of MNCs we come across a lot, where, for example, they are using SAP. There is one global instance of SAP which is used across all the countries by the company. So all the data is residing outside India, and they have not bothered to have this mechanism of having a backup within India. So what the law says is at least backup you have within India. So that is not still enforced rigorously. And coming back to other non-MNC companies also which store it in cloud, I think you have to ensure that the backup at least is in India.
Challenges. Say like they have say they're making spread of offices in the so all from different offices. But table itself they are that one table itself they fix all that 10. Now how they can bring one from India portion?
Okay. So to answer specifically with an example of SAP itself. Okay. So it's a single instance, but again, if you see company level, see there are you can divide most of the data in any application, especially in these instances, as company specific data, common data. So at least a majority of your configurations are company specific. Okay, so you can definitely identify what is company specific, and then from those, I mean, they should have actually a mechanism, probably a query or something which is run in the background, a small scheduled program, so which identifies all the company data, company specific data, copies it onto a separate instance, and then the instance has to be backed up. So that's the only way, to my knowledge. Yes, yes, it has to be done. There is no option there. So in cloud also you understand that there are settings which is possible where you can make the cloud setting as India specific. I mean, it's available in Azure, I understand. Yeah. The thing is, the data is available. Again, most of these cases, what is happening is because the primary server is there, application is there, backup is also there only. That they do as part of the routine process. But whether India-specific data is sitting inside India or not is the challenge. So that's not happening. No, that is prevented. So you have to derive this mechanism. I understand that there is this challenge, especially in these cases, and that's why there has been a delay also. Because technically also there is a challenge. Infrastructure investments is also required. So that is one reason why it's also not getting implemented as of now. One is audit risk mitigation. Okay, that's always there. So you have to point it out that this is a scenario. What are the steps you're doing for this compliance is something that you can ask. So most see inaction versus action. That is where we stand. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. If the audience has some other viewpoint, please let me know. But my viewpoint is at least you should be trying to do some action. So you prove that you're trying to do something, and what is feasible, what is not feasible, we'll come to that later. But most of the companies, what's happening is possibly illa, or they don't even bother to take or communicate to their parent company about this requirement itself. So, and generally, overall, also there is a lack of awareness about this specific provision. See, again, if you see, I mean, most of the laws, especially we Indians, we have this the carrot and stick theory, and we mostly comply only if the stick is taken. So because we have that culture and nobody, ROC has also not given any notices so far on this aspect, I think the compliance ratio is very, very low.
The RBI is now
See, in RBI's case, it so happened that, I mean, to my knowledge, most of the bank's primary financial statements, the core banking and all, is already residing in India. You don't have a case where it is outside India and you need to do the backup here. So that issue is not there in case of banks and financial institutions. Pardon me? And plus you have the data localization requirement, which was brought again 2 years back by RBI. So you have to necessarily mandatorily follow that. Even in banking MNCs also, because of this data localization problems, they have to have a separate server installed here and they have to have the India data here only. So the banks and finance, they have actually taken the necessary steps for that. Yes, yes, yes. Manufacturing and even service industry. This problem is still there. So, I mean, we've covered most of this in cloud services. See, audit rights is something, and jurisdiction and applicable law. That's another very important aspect in cloud services. And then, because usually, especially if you read agreements of Amazon and all that, it's usually the US jurisdiction or whatever is the jurisdiction that they primarily operate in. So, to that extent, we are always at a disadvantage there. So that's something consciously we need to enter. Another aspect is change management. I wanted to see specifically in cloud when you have private or public, especially for private cloud. I mean, especially if you're using a SaaS model. I mean, one thing we should always remember is don't customize to the extent possible, whether it is any SaaS application, least amount of customization required on cloud services. Because how will you identify and segregate and store becomes too complex, and then they carry forward and all that. And most of your agreements also don't cover those complexities and aspects. And another challenge in cloud is also security measures and incident response. Whose responsibility it is for the security incident? Again, I mean, there is this concept of shared responsibility in cloud. So the thing is, once I'm providing you, let's say I'm providing you the SaaS services, okay? Then the tendency seems to be any incident you only have to manage. It's not so actually. So there is a question of cyber security within the application and cyber security off the cloud. So off the cloud and in the cloud are two aspects. So cyber security and basic any IT security within the cloud is the customer's responsibility. What do I mean by that? Definition of roles, access control, for example, very simple example of access controls within the system and change management within the system. So those are all primary responsibility of the customer only, not the service provider. But cyber security or security of the cloud, overall, how is the database security, how is the overall network security, and then how is the application security overall. Those kind of things are largely, and then what is the backup and all I have provided. So those are the service providers' responsibility. This is, in fact, actually, it's a little more complex in the sense the kind of responsibility shifts if it is an PaaS model or an IaaS model. So there, the more responsibility goes to the service provider rather than the customer. So we need to see again the kind of model and stuff. One way of getting audit rights and transparency. So, especially in outsourced services, cloud services, all these cases. So, how do I get an assurance that the controls are there? I may not have the capability, technical, personal, whatever. I may not have the capability to go and audit. So, the general trend is to rely on third-party assurance. So, third-party assurance means some ex third party who's competent enough goes and does the audit, gives you the certificate, you rely on that. So that is where the SOC environment has, SOC 1, SOC 2 has gained a lot of traction in the last few years. So it's actually the increase in those certificates and the practice has increased corresponding to the cloud services that we have been using. So increase here has resulted in an increase there. But there is one challenge that you always face in SOC particularly is two challenges limited period of time. That is, it's typically 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months. And again, it may not correspond to your financial year. So that 9 months or 6 months will not correspond to your financial year. So what happens to the portion which is not covered? So how do I replace controls on those periods? This may be a question that your statutory auditor asks when he does the IFC. So how do I place reliance? How do I test the controls in that period? That could be a major challenge. So the only option is, sometimes they do wherever possible. They try to do it's the again becomes the auditor's responsibility, and you need to probably enable it. So one is they probably try to do some sampling wherever possible and try to gain comfort. And two is they actually interact with the supplier if the supplier is willing for it. That's a major question. Again, the equation that you have with the supplier, who is the bigger guy, who drives the relationship, all those things come into play. So it's not an answer which you can theoretically, if you see, yes, I have to enable conversation with the supplier, I need to understand competencies, controls, all that is there. But again, who is the guy who's calling the shots? Majorly, that is a risk. Then it's a calculated risk that you're taking, and we need to go on that basis. So that is the problem there. And another part is most of your SOC reports.
Are you getting letters?
Yes, true. But again, see, like I told you, again, who is the stronger guy? There have been instances where we've tried to push him. Let's take the example of the MNC case itself. We've had clients where the MNC is a parent company. He is either in Europe or US or somewhere. And now he has this concept of getting the SOC 1 or SOC 2, whatever it is. And but when we ask for the bridge letters, he refuses to give. See, for him, the India entity is not a material entity, so he doesn't care about whether there are controls here or not. But you, as a statutory auditor, you have this headache, to ensure that this compliance happens. And getting it through to them is a challenge. There is one client where we are taking this risk consciously because last 2 years we've been trying to explain to the in a parent company, please give us some kind of a support. He refuses flat. So it's a difficult position. So there, the statutory auditor has to take a conscious call on whether I qualify the control environment there. And so I'm saying no reliance can be placed, or then he'll have to say whatever alternate procedure can be done is done, and the remaining is an audit risk consciously taken. It's risky, very, very risky from an auditor perspective. Very difficult there.
Yeah.
Like I told you again, no, if you see most of these cases, again, US driven largely. Most of their companies are financial year ending December. So the 3 months is never covered. Our financial year is March. And most of my transactions, if I'm a typical Indian company, all my accounting entries, provisions, estimates, they come and get dumped there. Because especially I don't have quarterly reporting, and I'm a private limited company. I don't have quarterly reporting headaches or compliances. So year end is my major transaction aspect. So that is a open risk now. So can't be helped there.
The auditors are, let's say, not signing it, take it back.
And that doesn't happen, unfortunately. So that is also a reality. Like I told you that Nike and sweat labor case. Another thing I wanted to, an increasing business model, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, where third-party dependency has increased multifold, is your gig economy, your Ubers and your Swiggies and all that. So your entire business model is dependent on the third party. There is nothing that I own, right? Everything is the third-party service provider. So imagine, like in this case, when it happened for Swiggy, they all went on a strike for about the targets and the compensations which were paid and all that, the entire operations came to a standstill. Where is the business backup plan? It's difficult. The model itself is dependent on that, and they all come. See, it's not like in if you still go to a lot of manufacturing organizations, you have maybe 2 unions, 3 unions. They don't necessarily act in tandem. So one union will say something, and still you can function. One union strikes, you still have two small unions with whom you can do, and then you have outsourced manpower. You can still manage something. But here in the gig economy, it hasn't happened. They all unite together. At least in the specific instance that we came across, there was not a single dissenting voice which could you can leverage on. And so here, the risk itself is business continuity itself becomes a big issue. So so that is a bigger risk here. Forget my business model, business continuity is a big issue here. So then we've covered most of these. This is just to say about newer technologies which are emerging, especially Gen AI and all that. To what extent can I leverage, and to what extent will impact my third-party management, and to what extent when I'm using these technologies or whether these technologies are used by third parties, what is the risk? It's still a very evolving subject, and we'll need to understand each and everything based upon what is happening in the individual party. Because auditing of or even trying to do an independent assessment of Gen AI algorithm or Gen AI techniques is not an evolved subject till now. So we are still, gung ho about use case basis, but controls and so many challenges are there in AI that we have still not clear on how are we to address from a control perspective. So this is something which can probably, we'll need to see how this develops in the next 2-3 years. There are bound to be solutions, but again, now the onus here is again who can do the, let's say suppose the third party is using an AI, the same payroll function, simple example. Okay. Somebody has developed a small AI algorithm to do your entire payroll function. Okay. So again, here who's to test the logic? Now, whose onus is that going to be? Obviously, mine initially, but I wouldn't even have developed this contract, and I wouldn't even have stopped my service provider to tell me, hey, I have used this AI technology. He will not even inform me. Sometimes he'll come to know much, much later, maybe even a year later after he's adopted the technology. So, contract management is something that we have to revisit now in these emerging technology context. Because how do I safeguard? First of all, I can safeguard myself only if I'm aware of what is happening. What if I'm not even aware of what is happening? That gives me an increased risk scenario, right? So I can't do any mitigation. I can't do. So that is where, but still there is one small favorable thing is you still go about traditional review processes. You're still safe. Like we were talking about these reconciliations and all that. So you diligently keep doing that. So suppose the AI logic built is wrong, or maybe the machine learning has learned something wrong and done something wrong. You can still find out based upon these at least primary some 4 or 5 control factors that we need to identify and keep as a control mechanism, which I when I review before I pass it on. So I means I'm the company here. So when the service provider gives me this data, I need to use, we need to have these control mechanisms built in, basic control mechanisms, pure common sense control mechanisms wherever possible. Again, there are again scenarios which are highly technical where this may not even be possible. That is there. So risk mitigation again. So where possible, do it. Where not possible, let's wait and see. So we'll see how else to do it. One aspect is contract management, definitely. So where you can hold them liable, why did you tell, hey, come on, yeah, you're doing something like this. There could be a risk here. You are supposed to tell me that. And you build an auditability clause. If you see most of these service providers, they don't have auditability clause. They don't have confidentiality clause. They don't have non-disclosure clauses. They don't have any penal clauses. Sometimes even SLAs are not defined. One small one-pager PO is what is given to these guys, right? So, and you go and tell them, hey, so far I've not had a problem, yeah. So why are you troubling me? That is the attitude. So So past is never an indication of the future. That's something we'll have to drive home on, and it is our responsibility. Um, so I think I have sort of tried to cover most of the areas. So if you have any specific, we still have about half an hour nearly. So you have any specific questions or something else we need to discuss?
Now the GST, like fourth party also there will be a notice. Contractors can take it up. Yes, TV, right? They are out giving it to the other party. People are getting the notices. So, other as an auditor or the company also cannot.
Yeah, that is true. So again here, there is only one option. Again, contract. So we'll have to tell him if you are outsourced, either don't outsource at all. But if you're still outsourcing, then whatever liability comes, see, if the government is sending me a notice, I have no option except to reply. But in that reply, I have to tell them, see, A, this is not my responsibility. It is his responsibility to ensure that. So அவன் பண்ணல அப்படின்னா I can respond, and it can be a litigious issue there. It will go on extended. It is bound to happen. But at least what you can do is enforce certain things on the guy, and probably recover from him the cost of my engaging a lawyer, or cost of the legal cost, compliance cost, and interest, and whatever disallowance he's giving me, you pay me. So that kind of a things are the mechanisms we have to rely on. There is no option here.
Payroll. Typically, I was is here the third part. They are not checking. They are relying on the investment part. I find it myself. Company side. They are not checking it properly. Ultimately, the company only signing the authority.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Risk is in the company, but they are not checking. Particularly, they are giving their HRA investment.
See, okay, so actually we had a client where the question that we asked is, see, these guys had outsourced payroll, okay? Those guys were computing the payroll and giving them back the data. But these guys were checking the entire thing all over again. So this question, then we were forced to ask, if you're outsourcing, why are you again doing the checking here? So the question is being smart. We know risk areas 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, again, you'll have to probably, the company has to turn an auditor and do some sampling techniques. No, fact is most of them don't do.
That is a highly risk.
Yes.
Because they are the company signing it. Form 16.
Yes, that happens. Like I told you, the attitude is I've outsourced, so why bother? So again, the motto has to be I'm outsourcing the service, not the responsibility.
I have seen the company, the employees have tie up with outsourcing companies, which are not run as a HRA. Asking to do that. They are getting under.
So again, the audit is one aspect. Again, control, risk mitigation. Again, you include audit of the payroll even when you have outsourcing. See, scoping, when you, as an internal auditor, when you try to do a scoping, one challenge we always face is this is again, there are companies which are exceptions, but the trend seems to be most of the companies ask us to do only those functions which they carry individually. The only which is ideally insourced, which they are doing. So outsourced functions normally are not included. Yeah, outsource பண்றோம் இன்னும் பிரச்சனை இல்லை நீங்க அதெல்லாம் பார்க்க வேண்டாம் அவங்க பார்த்து கொடுத்துருவாங்க எங்களுக்கு. So the audit of the outsourced functions, so when we come and try to say then the cost aspect is what works on their mind and not the control, risk mitigation. So that's an education which has to happen, the system itself. Yes. So yeah, so third party risk management itself, if you see, it has to be again like any other control, top driven only. Any other perspective that somebody else would like to add? Any of the other members? Any experiences you would like to share? Please do. The floor is open. Thank you.